My name is Mark Frumar. I'm the CEO at Modii. At Modii, what we do is smart city infrastructure. We integrate systems and we do data analysis. So hearing what Julia was talking about before, a room full of data nerds, I feel like I'm definitely in the right place. Now, I don't need to explain to the room the antiquated nature of operations in our industry and the well overdue need for change in the way that we operate the curb itself. For years, we've been beating the drum on the need for digital transformation at the curb. The old way is no longer fit for purpose, and we want to improve the way that we move around people and goods in our densely populated urban areas. So what's been holding administrators back to date? Well, how many hours do you guys have? I could talk about this for days. The desire for innovation has always been there, but at the top of the list have been two key obstacles. A lack of funding is number one, of course, but there's also been a lack of a common utilitarian approach to making technological advancements across the board. Transportation leaders themselves are yearning for effective data that they can use to plan policy and plan that policy with confidence. Where they've been hamstrung to date is a lack of valuable data on what is going on at a street level. Data's already being collected, though from the cities and the universities that we work with, typically we see they have upwards of 10 to 15 different transportation systems, all being used with each having their own disparate set of data. So to date, we're finding these administrators have been stuck in analysis paralysis. Planners are overwhelmed with disparate data, and they're unable to use it to justify the policies that they're trying to implement that they know are going to help their communities. So to effect real change, such a massive adjustment requires not just cooperation from everybody here, but also collaboration on both the public and the private side. It requires the ongoing contribution of experts in urban planning and operations, technology, parking, mobility, event management, and plenty more that I haven't even named. With so many chefs in the kitchen, however, each with their own area of expertise, there existed an urgent need for a unifying organisation with a strong vision for the future of our industry. Now, while amazing solutions and platforms have now been established by vendors in this room, each come with their own area of specialisation. And without the OMF, we'd all continue to operate in data silos rather than working in harmony under the CDS and the MDS, which you should all be using undoubtedly by now. And this is where the OMF plays such an important role in our industry and the progress that is being made. By thinking bigger picture and ensuring that we unify on a common data standard, the OMF help us to refine modern technology that benefits our cities, companies, and our communities themselves. On the private side, for companies like us, Modii, the OMF allows us companies that would typically be seen as competitors to rather unite as a single voice and push forward the progress that we so badly need. It's incredibly valuable as it helps us to progress this growing, rapidly emerging sector and proves the old adage that a rising tide lifts all boats. So with that said, please allow me to introduce the Fireside chat on a new era of data-driven local government. In this session, we're going to hear how the public sector is breaking down internal silos, building cross-functional alliances with the private sector, thinking holistically and connecting the dots and adopting a modern data-driven approach to advancing the public good. Leading today's session, Stephen Goldsmith. Stephen is the Derek Bock Professor of the Practice of Urban Policy at Harvard Kennedy School's Bloomberg Center for Cities. Along with Stephen is Art Pearce. Art's the Deputy Director of Planning, Projects and Programs at the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation. Finally, alongside Stephen and Art is Gemma Schepers. Gemma serves as a Smart Mobility Project Manager for the Innovation Office of the City of Amsterdam. So would you please help me welcome Stephen, Art and Gemma to the stage.
So if you're in the last breakout, you heard that smart cities wasn't sexy, and so it feels like we've gone the wrong direction with the title of this session, Data-Driven Government. So let me start with a couple slightly unusual questions. I want to start with a rat question. So here's my rat question. So about 10 years ago, Bloomberg Philanthropies gave the city of Chicago $5 million to set up a data analytics center. It had a really strong CIO. She was terrific. And she had trouble getting participation from our agencies. So all she was trying to do is help them. But they didn't want to participate in the data project. So she tried something differently. She said, name a problem that you think data will help me solve. And the first problem was, can you predict for me where the rats infestations will be before the rats are there, right? So Art, what is the problem we're trying to solve here?
Well, great question. I think in broad senses, cities are struggling with so many challenges. So if we're focusing in on sort of how can innovation help cities, we're thinking about our challenges of Vision Zero, fatalities and injuries on our streets, challenges of equity and shared prosperity, the challenges of our downtown centers right now. So there's this series of public-private conundrums that I think we're not doing a very good job of explicitly understanding, gathering information, and then charting a course together about where we're going with those challenges. And I think that's part of what is fun about this convening is we're bringing together innovators and city leaders to have exactly that conversation. How can we bring innovations to solve specific challenges that catalyze our interest, not just in partnering, but actually even co-investing.
So Gemma, I'm going to ask you to translate what Art just said, and then we're going to have a chance to put that in 30 seconds after you listen.
Oh, you wanted a 30-second
No,
answer.
you have to wait, though. So Gemma, what is the problem? What's the value proposition that makes what we're doing so important?
So I make it like an extra abstract layer on top of it. Because if we look to the problems that we have as a city, we also see new trends coming up. So we see in Europe the trends of aging, we see a trend of climate change, heat stress, we see a trend of city getting more dense, more people getting into the city. And all those big trends that we are facing for the next decade, we're going to peel them off and then find out what are the challenges for our cities in Europe to anticipate on that big trends. And if you peel it down, you come to problems like, well, where do we park? How do we get the logistics done? What do we do with mobility? And then you really peel it down like a layered level down, and then you really make it into practice on how do we build innovations around that questions that we have in the city, the problems we need to solve. If we have more people in the city and we have less public space, what are we going to do and how are we going to manage the public space? And then you have dynamic public space. So we approach it in Europe and in Amsterdam from the very abstract, like horizon tree point of view. So I don't know if that is common also, Art?
Yeah.
How
so
you
Art,
approach it?
I want you to respond to it, but I also want you to help think about it this way. So you're before the city council, in behalf of the mayor or the city manager, explaining why we need to do OMF type stuff and data-driven government and mess around with these procurements in the midst of all the other things. How do you translate what you and Gemma just said into why they should agree with you or authorize what you want to do?
I think in the single phrase level, we have a failure to adequately co-create and co-invest in the future of our cities. We are perpetuating a misunderstanding between the private sector and community and government and the outcomes we're trying to produce.
Gemma, your city's been a leader in this for longer than almost anybody else. How did you create a sense of enthusiasm in the absence of a crisis?
So I think that's difficult. So you need to argument why we see problems facing and why it is a problem. So you have direct problems you see in the city. That is everyone understand and
Attention.
That you
Anticipate.
anticipate
Your
on
English
it.
is better than our
Yeah.
Dutch, so let's stick with English.
So you anticipate on it, and if you want people to get enthusiastic about problems that we are facing, so what we did, we built a big innovation team in the Netherlands. We have an innovation team in Amsterdam on 120 people at this moment. It's big, and we are a little bit structured outside the city of Amsterdam. We're not in the bureaucracy, so we have the freedom to test, to experiment, to do things outside the governmental structure. So we are also allowed to fail if we do innovations. And I think that works pretty well for Amsterdam.
That's a great answer. Let's stick with this particular subject. I was, at one time, my aged past, I was deputy mayor of New York over about a decade or so ago. And a part of the transportation department reported to me, and they did bikes and streets and taxi and limousine service that did Ubers, taxis, limousines reported to me. And then there was a group that did bikes, and they kind of reported all these in quotation marks, right? But so, and then there was the MTA that did subways that reported to nobody in City Hall, right? But nobody did mobility management, right? So if we think about the importance of OMF and the importance of data, is to create a mobility system. So how do you, in a U.S. city, do what Gemma mentioned? Do you need a chief innovation officer? Does the mayor, city manager have to appoint somebody to be in charge? What's the physical structure look like that would implement a system instead of a bunch of pieces?
I think it is a perennial challenge, and certainly one that I've navigated kind of the entirety of my 26 years now at PBOT. I do think it's around relationships. Francie's discussion at the beginning of the day talking about it's all about people and people relationships. Yes, you can and need to, I think, create power structures to create those dynamics. I do think you also need to attend to the individual aspirations of your semi-executive peers and your branch leaders to have discussions about what are they trying to get to as an organization, and then chart those paths together. I think it's really hard to coerce your departments into response. But it's a constant, it's truly a constant challenge. Yeah.
For Amsterdam, it's a big, big challenge. If we are the innovation team and we want to do new projects and experiment the projects, the digital projects in a physical public space, so you want to do something on the streets, we need to go to the department in the city that deals about the physical public space. So we need to get their agreement. And sometimes they are really behind the innovation thoughts that we have. So we need to really convince them all the time. It's a battle, it's a struggle. It's sometimes a fight, it's not easy. And you need to have a very long breath to get things done. But you need to have the get things done mentality, because otherwise you don't get there. So you need to push it all the time. Doesn't make you very popular all the time within the city, but at the end you achieve a result and then people are happy with it. But I don't know, it's for you the same. It's a struggle.
Yep. We end up buying a lot of cookies as thank yous to people who have flexed their organizational structures.
So all it takes in Portland is a cookie?
A lot of baked goods is really how you get things done, for sure. Yeah.
Just starting with you again, and I want to keep on this for a second. I'm going to get this quote wrong, but there's this kind of Machiavelli quote that says basically, because you're an expert in change management, so it basically says the following, that the people who are against you know who they are and they're really against you. And the people who will benefit don't yet know who they are and they wouldn't believe you'd get it done anyway, so they don't really care. Right, so you've got a mismatch. So think about the narrative and the structure as a way to manage the ecosystem, the stakeholders. Talk to us a little bit about how to manage that narrative in order to produce the change that we've all been talking about.
Yeah, it's a super challenge. I think one of the things that we have sometimes done well, but often don't do very well as government, is speak to what we're trying to produce as an outcome. We talk about if you're presenting the wrong side of the brownie box, you're presenting the ingredients all in the back, and what you should be showing is the ooey gooey brownie on the cover. And so we do, I think, a lot of time talking about all the ingredients and getting caught up in the nuances of the outcome we're trying to produce and not portraying the future shared outcome that hopefully gets people excited. And I think that's the sort of shared reward is both within government, certainly for our elected officials, is what we're trying to show that we're having impact. But it is a perennial challenge for sure.
Gemma?
Yeah.
It's a very big challenge. The vision that we have is not always the outcome that you expect. So if you experiment and you think, hey, this is the outcome can be something very different. So you need to keep on having the talks all the time with the people in your city and also the people in your ecosystem to constantly argument why you do what you do and why you need to change, because you see things coming on. And that is difficult because if you don't have the outcome that you expected, people can say, hey, you failed. But I think failure is a possibility if you do innovations and you start new things, because then you can learn and improve.
Well, you're in an innovation department. It might make it a little bit easier than it is for art, so let's do this one with you. In this room is a fairly large number of private sector companies who, if you asked each one privately, would say, there's a lot more creative things I could do for a city than they're letting me do. They might not say that to the city, but they'll say that to
No, they'll say it.
So how do you think about incorporating the innovative ideas of the private sector into your narrative and into your data-driven operations?
So we try to do that, but what we also see, so I think a lot of innovation comes from private companies. So they have ideas, they want to disrupt the city, want to improve the city. But the thing what makes it always very difficult, a lot of private companies don't always really understand what is the problem of the city. So you need to have the discussion with the private sector to explain, this is the perspective of the city, this is the problem we need to solve, and your product is amazing, but you need to make some changes for your product to incorporate it to the city. But you need to have these conversations also to shape the vision of the next few years. And you need to have the dialogue, because the perspective is really different and you need to get aligned with that perspective.
I was going to just add one thing. I think part of the challenge that I've encountered is that sort of out of fear perhaps, but government, it tries to produce their draft answer and then put out a procurement. And at that point, we've lost a whole bunch of time and we've tried to ourselves solve the problem rather than saying we have a problem and we would like to enlist help in solving this problem. So like requests for information level of procurement where we're at least finding the right partners to start a more formalized conversation with could save us just a whole bunch of internal work where we're producing our draft document and then putting out an RFP to find out that we framed it all wrong.
Even when I was a mayor and a deputy mayor and procurement reported to me, I still couldn't get procurement to buy a solution. They kept insisting on buying stuff.
For
right?
sure. Because it's quantifiable and trackable in a way that if you're really worried about spending money unwisely, you want to make sure that you can identify the widget that you're ending up with, right?
But, so spending money unwisely, I think we do spend a lot of money unwisely.
Yeah, I know.
I always called it, last year, I told it already, it's a golden garbage bin. You have very expensive projects and they go in the golden garbage bin because they're so expensive. But you always have side effects from the projects that you're running, and you always have a benefit of the projects, and you also need to realize and acknowledge the fact that you have those side effects that can be very positive, and then from there you can build on further. So it's money spent on wisely, but not always.
Right.
So just kind of moving a little bit, given the logos behind us. About to sneeze. I'm trying not to do that in the microphone. Let's think to both of you, the role of standardized data protocols as a part of innovation. Why is it important that we have such things?
Oh, for sure. I think it's to really start a real conversation with a shared body of knowledge. You need data that has been converted into information, so you can start to assess knowledge and start having a strategic direction. When you don't have, cities truly are running blind on a number of environments, and particularly the curb historically, and especially the logistics sector's usage of the curb is the kind of environment that we know very, very little about, but has a huge, profound impact on the congestion and safety and functioning of our city. And so creating standards such as MDS and CDS starts to be able to create the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. It's an essential ingredient for us to then launch real coherent conversations between the public and private sector about what are we going to do moving forward. Yeah.
I'm a big enthusiast. I'm very enthusiastic about standards. If you don't have standards, you have a chaos. So now we are able in the Netherlands, we build a Dutch profile on exchanging shared mobility data. So every city in the Netherlands and every shared mobility company that is putting the service into the Dutch cities using the same data standards. So we have the same data sets. We can compare all the data that we get from all the cities. And all the mobility companies need to implement a data standard only once. They don't need to negotiate with every city on a data standard. And I think that's very easy for the mobility companies, but also for the cities, because the cities don't have the knowledge, don't have the capacity to understand how a data standard is working and what to do with the data. So if you uniformed it and you use one data standard, it's very easy going. And you can roll it out, as you do in America, for a whole of Europe. And we have discussion with micro-mobility providers, the share car companies. They don't want to exchange the data with APIs. They have all kinds of arguments around it. I don't really understand them. But what they do, they just share an Excel file with all the private information of the users. And I think, how can you not understand that sharing data with an API is much more secure, much more private, much more easier, it's uniform. So I think that's a must, very must.
All right, let's stick with this, but I want to kind of modify it just to...
She just got applause for that, noteworthy. Yeah.
Let's just stick with it and modify the question a bit. So if you have standardized data and you have more data and you have somebody responsible for the data and you have somebody that's kind of managing mobility. Now let's think about it in the following way though. How do you use the data? Because one of the things that we've talked about earlier in the first session was the changing environment in the U.S. based on the election, right? I'm not going to that, but I want to go to the subject for a second. So one way to think about how right and left might agree is that if we had data that makes the system work more efficiently, it allows me to make a decision about how I want to get to work more easily. It allows us to make a decision about where our enforcement officers go to do their work, right? That makes government more productive, that takes the information that Gemma mentioned and transparently allows people to understand kind of what's happening in the city. So talk to us a little bit about the role of transparency and clarity in order to make the market work better.
Yeah, well, I think one, the government policymakers are always trying to decide their postural response to any given topic, and particularly around innovation. Somebody comes with a new innovation, let's say scooters. We were talking about scooters earlier. You know, how should a city see the innovations of scooters as an opportunity or a threat? And being able to assess that not just on your value system, but actually based on real information. What is the impact of this innovation, to then decide whether this is an opportunity or need for regulation, or what ways are we regulating, what ways are we simply permitting it to happen, and where should we be co-investing to be able to end up with that outcome, is really hard absent that foundation of data. And I think similarly for private actors, individuals, as they're trying to decide how to navigate their day, absent cues and prompts, they're not using the full set of information as they are making their choices. And particularly transportation sector is, I think, especially co-produced by every actor, both the commercial side and the individual side. As someone's choosing how to leave their house, they are actually co-producing that transportation system that day, whether they know it or not. They're either in traffic, or they decided to take the bus, or they're biking to work. And I think without information, we don't know whether that impact is really happening or not.
So if we come to the data and the data that we collect as a city, we collect a lot of data. We build data sets and layer them up on each other. And we want to have a lot of information on how people traveling through the city. We have pretty good insights in Amsterdam, but the thing that it makes it very difficult for us as policymakers in the city, we have the insight, but we don't know really what to do with the insight. So it's very difficult for us to go to the next level, and that is a thing that's lacking not only in Amsterdam but in more European cities. What are we going to do with the data? What are we going to do with the data analysis? How do we going to translate them in decisions? What decisions do we want to make, and how do we make policy out of it? And how then can we more regulate the city? That thing, the next steps. I don't know how it's for you, Archie.
No, it's super hard.
That is the thing that is lacking, and that are the steps, the challenge for the city that we see for the next the next decade. I don't know. And if we ask private companies to help us with that decision making, we still don't get really a good answer for them, because they don't understand the political system within the cities. So that is, I don't know. I don't have the answer for there. How do we make that steps?
I have a question for you, but you have an answer for me to some question I haven't yet asked.
No.
Your hand's up.
No, it's okay. I'll stop.
We have a few minutes left, so let's go back to the first question. Let's assume that we have widespread adoption of standardization, curb, and mobility, and that we have a person or an entity or a group that's responsible, right? And that there is clarity about underpricing, overpricing, who's not paying their share, right? So that there's total fungibility in. I'm making this as complicated as possible, but I want to assume a system, right? Okay. A system that has private partners, a system that's clear. What are the one or two most important things you would accomplish in such a system? Perfect information, well-structured government, willingness to take innovation. Therefore, the people in Portland will be better off because.
I think that there's greater efficiency. There's a degree of inefficiency certainly in our systems now. So I think it would result in a more efficient system. I think we can understand our inequitable outcomes better. I think that's sort of the under-acknowledged challenge with cities is that always, every day, some people are benefiting and some people are not in how our cities are functioning. And so being able to bring more transparent information would allow us to use policy levers to create more shared prosperity. And I think there's more money to be made. I think for the private sector, government should embrace businesses making money in their cities. That's a great part about cities functioning and is an essential ingredient. And I think with better information, we can do that and do that to a better outcome than we are today.
I want to give Gemma the last words. So I feel more comfortable being rude to him because I've known him longer. But how do you think about, or do you think about how pricing and availability drive behaviors, whether it's pricing parking or pricing transit? I mean, one of the confusing things about this whole kind of way we think about it is that not only are we trying to produce a set of revenues, we're trying to use prices. Think about the mess of congestion pricing in New York City. We're trying to use prices to change behavior. So do you think about that explicitly?
Absolutely. No, I think the data that we are creating is the essential ingredient to be able to bring pricing systems for usage either of the roadways or of the curb, for sure. And we're moving more and more to an a la carte funding system for our cities. And so it's essential that use-based fees are a growing ingredient, honestly, because we're not adequately funding our cities through general revenues. And so yes, particularly those uses that have an impact based on time of day or emissions of vehicles, all those things need to be part of the structure.
So Gemma, last word, tell Art, if he were as good as Amsterdam, what he should have been doing.
We don't always know all the answers, but I think we use pricing a lot to change behavior. That's just how it works. And I think what we should do more, what I would advise to every city, to take more responsibility and also put some money to the responsibility you have to get the whole ecosystem together. It's not always the responsibility of the private companies. You want to work with them, but usually they are very willing to work with you, but you also need to put your responsibility and your money there to get things changed. And that is how I see it. And
Great. Well, help me thank our panelists. We're out of time.